Hello, everyone. This is Andrew. Welcome to Atomo, December 6th, 2022. And there's a lot of fun things going on. So, in this episode, I'm going to take a look at energy things going on, as well as there's some action happening in Poland on a military front. So, I was watching a video from a Polish who's called citizen journalist, Anya K44. So thank you, Anya, for all her work in reporting things happening in Poland. Great that she can translate work and bring it into the English language. And she talks about the Polish army beginning mass conscription. So similar to what you might have heard in Russia, where Russia has found contractors or folk that have been in the military before and conscripted them in a contract type form. I don't think they're regulars. They actually have a contract to go out and fight. They get a summons. So similar things happening in Poland right now. So I'm going to dance between that and some talks about energy that's happening. Um, so I'll put Anya's links in the description below so you can go and check out her work. I really like how she's thoughtful to the point. Let's take a look here, just looking through some of my notes. There's a little funny thing that came up. There is a European commissioner for the internal market, Thierry Breton, and there was a EU-US trade technology summit. And it was in the US, but Europe was complaining a bit because there wasn't enough focus on European issues. So I can't remember the one European technocrat, maybe a member of parliament, talking about Europe is the garden and everything else is a jungle, and we need more gardeners to help out, or else the jungle will come in and take over. And it's helpful for us to tame the jungle. So really, Europe at this point is if that's all they want to do is sip tea and sit in their little garden, that's probably all that they have, given that their rapid deindustrialization is going on, and with Jerome Powell hiking rates as fast as a drunken sailor can go out and get some woo wah wah on shore leave. You're just going to see more and more things happening in Europe, and it's you're going to have the faction that wants to keep Europe together and probably put tighter political integration together, and you'll have groups that say no, like Hungary and Italy are like no. Even in the former Yugoslavian republics, there's something shaking loose there as well. So Europe, as putting everybody together and melting potting them into this kind of post national entity. They're just people are different. Just to segue into this, it looks like maybe once you get around 7 million people as a community, you have a pretty solid community. Once you start going beyond that, then you're looking at the community potentially fracturing, especially if wedge politics are being used to make the people within the populace start to distrust each other. Then things start to become unglued a bit. So let's take a look at the entity called Ukraine. Historically, the Western parts of Ukraine were more aligned to, and I'm going to really simplify this, the Western part of Ukraine was more aligned to, I won't necessarily say German, but not Russia or not Soviet Union, whereas the Eastern part, a little more Soviet Union friendly. as we know. And there's been a lot of back and forth in Ukraine over the history, and even when you had the group, I believe the kulaks, after there was an opening up of the economies after the Tsarist Russians pulled back, and there was this area where entrepreneurial pursuits could arise, and then the Soviets came in and then renationalized all the farms and creating the famine in Ukraine that killed about 6 million Ukrainians. So there's still a lot of that in play, and it's a very complicated situation. You can't take what's happening in Ukraine and split it into blue team, red team. It doesn't work that way. So even with some of these talks about Poland might be, this is conjecture, but we have to keep looking at, well, why is Poland now starting to militarize? Why? And Anya saying about 200,000 people being conscripted. Well, they have to get trained, and that means something might be happening. Even some conjectures that they might start peacekeeping operations in Western Ukraine to guarantee the security of Ukraine. So NATO might guarantee the security, which means if Ukraine disintegrates, then the armies are going to be put in place to maintain law and order in the areas, and then sign some paperwork and say, okay, well, Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk and some of the Ternopil regions, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing these wrong, might flip over to Polish control. And I have to think about, let's go back to, remember back in the Second World War when Russia was speeding over towards the Japanese area. Basically, they were just going to go, and there was talk about Stalin just taking over the Japanese islands, and he ready to send ships and everything over to end that once Germany was done. And there's conjecture that perhaps the atomic bombs were used to force Japan to surrender very quickly before Stalin took over that area. I bring that up because it's the same, if you look at the strip of Ukraine going from that western side north all the way down to Odessa, if that strip were to be brought under Polish control, then NATO would be able to secure maybe perhaps a front line against now the movement of the states within Ukraine that want to go over to the Russian side of the fence. So there might create buffer lines there. So, but this might take maybe a year or two to play out. So keep looking at that. We're looking at with the energy things going on. There's the Russian oil cap at $60 a barrel that the EU is trying to enact, and just trying to understand the rationale behind this. Russia is not going to get down on their hands and knees and say, "Oh, you put it at $60 a barrel. Oh, well, I guess we'll have to sell it to you at $60 a barrel." No, that's not going to happen. You're not going to capitulate the Russian economy. You have to remember things about Russian economy is they have a very low amount of debt, sovereign debt. They use the trade surpluses from energy to help bolster their economy. And even with Europe coming offline, there's a lot of the whole collective South can buy oil from Russia at a discount. OPEC is cutting production to pump prices up as well. So, and OPEC, and especially the states like Saudi Arabia, looking to join BRICS, because now we're seeing new lines being drawn now that Europe has finally gotten to a point where there's just seems statecraft is gone. And what I mean by statecraft is gone is this either the politics, like you might think that there's some sort of 3D chess or 5D chess or many whatever, that these people have it all figured out. And after myself seeing how these folk think, I'd rather find a group of gamers that let's take something like the Eve Online universe. How about you sit down with them and talk about economics and how to win some of these things? Because some of those players are massively creative and work within constraints, like just some of the smoothest operators I've seen. I used to play the game and I read up on it once in a while, and just some of the things that that player base can come up with is these politicians don't hold a candle to that kind of thought. And I find more like, especially the collective West, it's we lost statecraft and where it has gone. So either you get some of these politicians just I don't even know how they run economics through their heads, understanding supply and demand. Okay, so let me just, instead of me pontificating here and there and throwing little sayings out. So when you allow, if you unfetter your economy, take away barriers to creating markets, and then let that price go up, people will then find ways to take the risk to bring supply to meet that demand. It's going to happen at higher prices. This is why caps don't work. You'll get fuel lines. And if what you want are fuel lines and a disgruntled population that you have to bring in your militaristic horses to stomp them down, thank you, government of Canada, then then you get a Babel Tower situation where it's just going to fall apart. And if the point is to make it fall apart, so it becomes people want more government because things are falling apart and they can't, you want to sit on your back in your wounds and virtue signal and say, oh my God, I'm a victim, and not like really do the hard work necessary. Go back and think about our ancestors who built the collective West. Now these I don't know, wet rags are just tearing it down. So Olaf Scholz is making intentions to guarantee European security. Security from what? Or you think Russians don't power project? They're not built for power projection. So what do you need to guarantee European security from? Russia's more like a porcupine. The closer you get to the heart of it, the stronger its quills will get. They're not built to roll an army across Europe or anything like that. It's just not how they're designed. USA is a logistical army. They're very good at logistics. Don't know how well the army would fight. And a lot of people say, oh, they're the best, they'll wipe you out. Well, they haven't fought a foe with extremely high resolve since World War II. And if you want a foe with extremely high resolve, show up on the shores of Russia or China, and you'll see a foe with extremely high resolve. And then you'll be surprised with potentially the weapon systems that they've developed and tested. A lot of this United States stuff really hasn't had a good battle testing. So you don't know if a couple hypersonic missiles just stop a carrier air group unless they want to go test it. We really don't like that idea. That means escalation happening. Are Russia running out of missiles, arms, and all that stuff? Now you hear on the Bubble Vision, the talking heads on Bubble Vision out in Normie News, that oh yeah, they've run out of weapons and stuff many times over, yet they're still showing up. And now, Raytheon, Greg Haynes is saying, yeah, we used up so many stocks that now, how are we going to replenish the inventory? Well, hopefully your organizations haven't gone so woke that nobody knows how to build anything anymore. You just sit on government money and, I don't know, play foosball all day instead of building the armaments. I thought the USA had a lot more stores of arms, and of course that means they're playing in the war by sending this stuff over. And it just seems that they're depleting their own army stocks, they're depleting their strategic petroleum reserve. So it's vandalism up and up there. Let's change gears a bit. Mongolia, here's an interesting one, where Mongolia produces a lot of coal. There's a couple types of coal. There's thermal coal for power generation. There's coking coal, which is used to make steel. Now, coking coal is very important. If we want a green economy, we need coking coal because a lot of the implements require steel or stainless steel to build. And coking coal has a higher carbon content in it, and it's needed to produce steel. There are other things like using arc furnaces for making steel, but that's extremely energy. It's a big energy hog in order to do that. So unless you have a lot of excess capacity on your networks, yeah, it's coking coal is going to be here for a very long time until some sort of significant change happens or we get more dense energy. Come on, Manhattan Project for fusion, not seeing it. Even CERN laboratory in Europe has to start turning off its accelerators just because of the high energy use they take, and cost of energy is so high now. So we're losing our scientific capability in the collective West. And this is the problem when you start playing with energy and making it more expensive. We're going to turn into a scientific backwater and watch. It's going to take time, but Russia and China can potentially outstrip us. They'll just do it by sheer manpower and having the energy. China has a lot of people that are going through school. India has a lot of people that are going through school. They understand there are techniques in the West. They've learned it all. And we're not keeping up because, again, we got weak leadership. Then again, Mongolia here, protests going on because what happened is the Mongolian People's Party, head of the Mongolian government secretary said at least 15 government officials and ministries and departments were involved in a coal theft. And supposedly there's been Chinese officials involved. So it was a sale of coal to China. There's a claim here, and I was trying to validate it. If you heard something, and have a link in the comments below, that the Chinese officials have been executed. What a great way to hopefully end corruption, but can't say that Chinese executing a few officials there is going to stop rampant corruption. I guess they were on the wrong side, probably weren't in the party, so that was ended pretty quick. Flip back to Poland. What's happening in Poland is there's combat vehicles now arriving. The 1st Infantry Division of the U.S. Army, including tanks and other armored vehicles, are landing in the port of Gdynia. Hopefully, if I'm pronouncing that right. And there's about 700 vehicles, including M1A1 Abram tanks. So you got M1A1 main battle tanks, which are the main battle tank of the USA. There's some new Abrams tanks now being looked at. I think the Abrams X or something like that is what I think that might be in trials, but it's not in mainstream production yet. So that just means that, okay, now Poland going to take 200,000 people and flip them into these machines. We have to wait and see, and then have an agreement to go into the west part of Ukraine. Say, yeah, we're just going to hang out and make sure the Russians don't take over all of Ukraine. See what happens. The Russians look like they might be using their newer T-90 tanks and bringing them into play. So more on that later. They haven't been using the top line stuff. I think using the older T-72s. Now they're bringing out, looks like they're bringing out the bigger stuff. So possibly you got about 200 units that have gone to the special military zone operation. You also have equipment that has been in some of the channels moving into Belarus. So equipment's being moved around. That's not something to take lightly. You know, if you're going to put on a condom, you're probably going to go do the deed. So yeah, it's unsettling to see that, because it's just, again, escalation. There's no calls of de-escalation, and even you would think that the tolerant left in the United States would actually say, you know, it's probably not a good idea to keep escalating like this, and we have to repair relationships. And that's, you know, what's been done is done. But it's like Czechoslovakia before the start of World War II, and you know, one third of Czechoslovakia going. Well, this is different. These are different times, different situations. You can't completely put the template of the past and overlay that on top. You know, even other things that are happening in Russia. They're not here. I'm not for Russia. I'm basically trying to figure out what the heck's going on. And as I say before, checking the board position. Who are the players? What pieces do they have on the board? What's their positional power here? Because in us in the collective West, we're throwing our pieces off the board too easily, and I think it's just seemingly is incompetence at this point. Rosatom, which is the nuclear agency of Russia, is building nuclear power plants in India, and I believe they have about 140 or maybe 150 billion US dollars worth of contracts on their books. Like, it's amazing just the amount of work that they're doing. And while we sit here in the collective West with our thumb up our bum, another thing to look out for, just kind of closing this out, is with the oil price hike, um, or this ceiling cap. Russia's turned around saying, okay, well, we're just going to sell at a minimum amount. They could make it $61 a barrel and say that's our starting price, and just to have some fun with what Europe's doing. But in around Turkey, and I mentioned this before, Turkey has a good geopolitical place on the game board. And because they control the Bosphorus Strait and there's treaties on it, there's only a certain amount of shipping traffic that's allowed through. And funnily enough, as I was reading, is there Erdogan plays a very odd game. You'll sometimes seeing him looks like he's slapping the face of the Russians, and then he turns around and he's checking all the Western insurance on the ships, but doesn't seem to be checking the Russian insurance on the ships. So it's just then ships have to wait for the insurance checks, and if they have to wait, then it creates like a bottleneck. So moving from the Black Sea, and this is potentially a way that if weapons and materials are coming up into the south, that they can use this um, shenanigans that are going on. Well, not really shenanigans, but the row over the oil prices and playing with the insurance to create log jams. And potentially there are ships that are kind of wanting to smuggle weapons into the Odessa region. You might get, you know, Polish groups from the north doing their work, and then getting some work coming in from the south, because material and equipment have to come into Ukraine in some ways. Russia does have, you know, some insight on what's happening. Every large country has an intelligence network, and they can figure this stuff out in almost real time. Especially with, we got these cell phones nowadays. It's easy to say, oh yeah, I see okay, I haven't seen these trucks come through before with these tarps on, or a convoy, and you know, stern looking people, and maybe somebody pops out and you spot a rifle or something, and it's like, okay, well, that's odd, haven't seen stuff like that before, maybe something's happening. And people take a video and they can just even just upload it somewhere, say, hey, this is odd. It doesn't even need to be somebody who's in intelligence, just people saying, okay, I got odd things happening. And because our police department say, if you see something odd, you see something strange, report it. Because usually, because we're trying to keep our community safe, and then we see things like, perhaps these areas you see military equipment being potentially moved through, and it's startling, it's different, and people will talk about it. And then from there, then all that gets aggregated. So just wanted to leave you with that, some of the things that are happening, and hope you will see you in the next video.